The big spenders were out in force at the most watched sporting event of the year. We had the usual suspects like Doritos, Uber Eats, E-Trade, Mountain Dew, and of course, more beer than you can shake a pint at. Sports betting, automotive, and candy also took center stage. So what can we learn from this extravaganza? Marketing and sales are full of myths, misconceptions, and sometimes ridiculously expensive commercials. Join us as we leave the echo chamber and unpack some of our learnings from this year's roster of the most lauded commercials.
Hello and welcome to the Rethink Marketing Podcast, where we try not to get caught up in the shock and awe of global powerhouse brands. I'm Paul Froese, joined by Mr. Marketing, and for today's conversation, the gallant gardener of getting game day gains, Colin Jeffries. Colin, how are you today?
Paul, I feel about as well as a marketer whose Super Bowl commercial paid off. How about you?
Yeah, I'm not sure we can say Super Bowl anymore, can we? But, in our podcast, we're not making money, so I guess we'll be okay on that.
I hope so. If the NFL wants to sue me, there's not a lot they could take.
Well, once the cease and desist comes, our podcast episode will already be uploaded and recorded, so there's nothing to cancel at that point.
That's true. I like the alliteration too. Game day gains. I think that's what a lot of brands are hoping for this year.
That and also all of the sports betting apps as well.
Yes, sports betting was out in force this year for sure. Well, and it was interesting too to see a redo or a 2.0 version of the Kick of Destiny, although it didn't seem like they branded it quite that way. But FanDuel, I felt like did a good job of bringing that to life again. And then the follow-up spot that they had with it too seemed to land very well.
I can't tell with Robert Gronkowski if he is actually missing that on purpose or he just can't kick a football.
It's possible.
I can't figure it out. But that definitely a couple years running on that promotion has been good.
Yes, very, very interesting. Well, Paul, I guess we could talk high level about some of the spots you liked, didn't like. I think for me, there are a couple of big takeaways from this year's slew of big game commercials. First is just the incredible level of talent on the production side and on the acting side and directing side. I mean, when you think about Ben Affleck, Tom Brady, Matt Damon, Michael Cera, Arnold Schwarzenegger, like the list of A-level talent is long. And the other local commercials that are being played and juxtaposed with those, when we're thinking about, I'm going to put my niece in the commercial or I'm going to do my own spot. And then that's running in local airtime. And right next to it is, J-Lo or Kris Jenner or somebody else that is a very talented actor. The level of expectation that we as viewers have is now for A-level talent. And that plays out in the production and directing side as well. When you think about it, if you're spending $7 million for a 30-second spot, which is astronomical, you have to have A-level talent.
No question about that. I even saw those little 5-second ads for Crossroads Church locally in some of the breaks, so that going up against J-Lo and Beyonce really is a good forum for promoting some of our local businesses and churches as well.
Absolutely. I think Fifth Third had a couple of spots and Kroger. It's fun to see some of the local airtime taken up by good local brands as well. The second thing that I noticed is there was a lot around social media shareability. That's no surprise. We definitely have seen that in the past. But this year we saw a couple of influencers, Addison Rae probably most notably of TikTok fame. And brands seem to really be engaging this before and after effect of Super Bowl commercials where many of them were releasing teasers instead of the full commercial. And I'd love to get your opinion on that, Paul. And a lot of them were kind of breaking the fourth wall. We're seeing these extended spots. We're seeing options where folks are running, a 90-second spot, and then they have a 90-second spot that's being shared on social, or a 1-minute spot, and then their actual in-game spot is more of a 30-second cut, and then some behind-the-scenes stuff. I think State Farm in particular did a great job of leveraging earned media with Jake from State Farm and Arnold Schwarzenegger working out I think it was at Venice Beach. And of course, Arnold going on the Tonight Show and talking about Agent State Farm and all that. So a lot of brands did a great job of just embracing the earned media, the social media, the shareability of their Super Bowl spots. So, Paul, I guess with that, I'll kind of kick it back over to you. I am curious to know, what did you think about the teaser aspect of things? Was that a win? Was that a loss?
I like the teaser opportunity, and each year it seems like it gets a little bit better. And you talk about the long form content that social media has, and in preparation for this episode, I was looking at the 90-second commercials and how it differed from the 30-second cuts. And a couple of them I was disappointed. I like the longer form content, but obviously it's $7 million a pop for a 30. Sure, 21 million for the 90-second spot wasn't in the budget for a lot of these companies. So,
That's right.
but the longer form, I know the one for Paramount Plus was one that I watched in advance, and seeing that play out versus how the 30 ended up. I like the 90 a lot better. But yeah, the teasers are certainly something that gets people excited. You see some of these A-level talent actors and musicians that you can expect to see in the actual commercials themselves. So I think leading up to it, it was certainly a good play for a lot of the brands.
Yes, absolutely. One thing that I found really interesting is it seemed like the last couple of Super Bowls, there have been a lot of commercials that had been around social justice and sort of identity posturing, I would say, from a marketing perspective, to use marketing jargon. This year, it seemed like we had a little bit of a return to humor, but it was humor not at the expense of a group of people or even like certain types of customers, but it was really self deprecating humor at the expense of the acting talent. So I think of Michael Cera in the CeraVe commercial. I think about, Paramount Plus's Starfield ad where they kind of made fun of Hey Arnold for his football shaped head. And then, of course, Arnold in Agent State Farm, where he couldn't say neighbor, he was saying neighbor. Right? And the list goes on. There's a lot of self-deprecating humor. And it seems like as marketers, we sort of found our sweet spot of, hey, we can make fun of ourselves. The talent can make fun of themselves. Ben Affleck can make fun of himself or what have you. Or Matt Damon can make fun of him. And we're not risking offending anybody. It's still humorous. It's still engaging. It's still memorable. It's still shareable. But no one's sort of at risk. What do you think about that, Paul?
I totally agree. The other one that stands out to me is the BMW spot with Christopher Walken.
Yes.
And everybody trying to talk like him. And you already gave a good impersonation of Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'm wondering if you can copy that for Christopher Walken as well.
Yeah, I don't think I've got the Christopher Walken in me as much, but he does have a very distinct voice. I did think it was funny, speaking of people that did teasers, where he was on the phone. He's like, what do you mean? It's an ad for an ad? And I thought that landed pretty well, where they were trying to get, that sounded more like Danny DeVito, I guess, than Christopher Walken. But speaking of self-deprecating, but I thought he did a good job, or BMW did a good job of not actually showing any of their commercial until the game. They had the teaser spot that they pushed pretty hard leading up to it.
Yeah, and incorporating Usher into it wasn't bad either.
Yes, agree with that too. Uber Eats incorporated an Usher as well. If you remember something or if you learn something new, you forget something else. I thought that was moderately humorous as well.
With Jennifer Aniston. Yeah,
Yes.
that was good. That was good. And competing head to head against DoorDash, right? And I don't know if I saw a DoorDash spot in the Super Bowl, but I've seen a lot of ads for DoorDash recently to talk about all the other things that they can pick up. I remember when I was dropping my daughter off to a ballet rehearsal, and she had forgotten something, some Band-Aids, and she door dashed it from CVS down to the studio. So it's certainly amazing how these DoorDash and Uber Eats are expanding their capabilities. Interesting to think in hindsight, though, if they would have gone back to the drawing board a year or two ago, would they have called it Uber Eats or Uber Everything? How would you? Is that going to be rebranded here in the near future?
That's a good question, because when I think about, I think it was 2023, but it may have been 2022, where they did the whole Uber Don't Eats, if you remember that, where people were getting pencils and all sorts of stuff and chewing on them. So that's a good point. The Super Bowl is a really good platform for rebranding or to emphasize rebranding. I think about, Dunkin' with the Dunk Kings, how they were Dunkin' Donuts and they've dropped the donuts. And now this is a really good platform for them to come out and say, hey, we are kind of donuts and all this other stuff.
Sure. And looking at Super Bowl ads or just commercials in general, I think about what makes a really memorable commercial. And in my opinion, it's the nostalgia, which a lot of these brands hit on with the actors as well as the music. And thinking about times in your life where you may have heard different music and it's being played now. And if you had a good experience with that in the past, now you're having flashbacks, or like Nerds and T-Mobile flash dance songs that are being played in the Super Bowl spots, and getting people dancing and thinking about good times in their life is, I believe, what some of these ads really hit on, and it was a good thing for many of the brands for sure.
Absolutely. I thought one of the ads that played up on the nostalgia vibe that landed really well was the United Airlines ad featuring Coach Taylor from Friday Night Lights. Believe so hard you book your flight now. That seemed to really play up on. And again, Friday Night Lights, I think, had a big following and was very well known. And I don't remember what that actor's name is, but he's a very strong actor. And I felt like that ad did really well. I'll say another ad that had nothing to do with nostalgia and really didn't have anything to do with humor that did a really good job was Temu. They ran several ads, so it must have been a pretty expensive night for them. But man, they came out and they basically explained the product in almost a product demo video with a really catchy song. It was bright, it was splashy, the animation was pretty strong, as you would expect when you're spending that amount of money for a 30-second spot. But very pragmatic, not very funny, pretty memorable though. What do you think about Temu, Paul?
I had a bad experience with Temu in the past, but I guess I was trying to shop like a billionaire, is what their tagline says, and it's interesting to see their business model. It's ordering a bunch of things on an app and then getting more free things, and you feel like it's a really good experience all the way through until the product gets delivered to your house. And I did not have a good experience with it. It's interesting to see also with Temu is the acquisition. Is it people ordering more than one time? A lot of the reviews would say no. And I would say that they're always looking for a brand new customer because the products are not very good. But, maybe some people are having better experience than I did.
That's really interesting. I've had a few friends that have used it that have had their credit cards compromised after they've used it. So I have not myself engaged in Temu, but it seems like an interesting concept. And to your point, if customer churn is really high, how better to get branding and to get some more brand recognition and I'll say too, to build some legitimacy. I mean, we're not seeing these upstart new brands that can't afford to take a loss on a Super Bowl spot, actually shell out that sort of money. So very interesting to look at running a Super Bowl spot as sort of building legitimacy for an arguably questionable brand.
I saw a JP Morgan analyst article about Temu and how they're planning on spending $3 billion in advertising this year. So they've got the money. They obviously have the business coming in to be able to warrant that type of ad budget.
That's wild. I mean, when I think about how how well I thought that spot did, it landed well. It was bright. It was memorable. It was catchy. I can tell you, oh, here's what their tagline is. Here's what they do. I thought it landed pretty well.
Colin, we talked a lot about national spots. We talked about the local spots as well. One thing that I thought was interesting was Curiosity and the Dude Wipes commercial. And I read a lot about that, how they were testing that in 4 different markets. Cincinnati happened to be one of them. And that Dude Wipes commercial, I felt really hit the mark with the creativity and being able to take that $7 million budget and parse it down into 4 different test markets to see how it would play out in the Super Bowl, and then decide maybe for next year if $7 million would be worth it versus a regional ad spend.
I'll say, I think maybe there were 2 spots that ran during the Super Bowl that made me laugh out loud, and that was one of them. That was just hilarious. And to your point, like any good stand-up comedian, they're not going into it on their big recorded special and testing out some jokes. And I think Dude Wipes is a great example of this, where they tested some spots, they looked at some different markets, they actually did their research. And then when they ran that spot in the big game, it really paid off. And I thought it was funny, it was memorable, it was very well done. The social media shareability was obviously there. I think whatever their goals were, they probably accomplished them.
Totally agree. Some other ones that really stood out to me, Colin, during the Super Bowl was the Verizon spot with Beyonce, the Popeyes chicken with Ken Jeong.
Yes.
The Kawasaki with the business in the front, party in the back. Those were a few other ones that I think definitely warrant being part of the conversation.
I thought even without Stone Cold Steve Austin, I thought that spot was pretty humorous, and it did a good job of kind of showcasing what they were all about with the, is that the Razor? I'm unfamiliar with the Kawasaki 4x4 branding, but I thought they did a good job with that. Business in the front, party in the back, very memorable and funny. Well, Paul, lots of great spots that ran in Sunday's Super Bowl, the 2024 Super Bowl. We talked about the incredible talent. We talked about social media shareability. We talked about self-deprecating humor. And we talked about teasers versus the entire ad. And then obviously extended ads versus the shorter cuts. I thought it was a pretty fun conversation. I enjoyed watching the commercials. Honestly, I enjoyed watching the commercials probably a little bit more than the game. It kind of started out a little slow in my opinion. But anyway, a great time to see sort of the big showcase of the year for advertisers and big spenders with national brands, and in some cases, international brands. So really, really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope our listeners did as well. Hopefully you all got a lot out of watching this year's Super Bowl commercials, and there are some things that you can apply to your own businesses. Until next time, keep rethinking those common assumptions. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If people want to connect with us, where should they go, Paul?
RethinkMarketingPodcast.com, Colin. What can listeners do to help us in return for the sage marketing wisdom and our pithy humor?
They can help us by leaving a review on their favorite platform or sharing this episode with a fellow marketer to help them cut through the clutter.
Well, until next time, keep rethinking those common assumptions.